Hi, Saki here. Today I'm going to explain how to manually apply a patch to most programs you can find on your computer. So first I will explain how executables work in general, notably that some of them can work on their own anywhere and others really need to have some files they depend on to be in the same folder. Then I will shortly explain how a patch for programs is actually made, so the process that's involved into creating a patch. And then I will talk about the actual patching process on the user end. So let's begin with the way executables work. There are basically two types of executables that we need to care about when it comes to patching. The first kind is standalone executables, and what I mean by standalone is that those executables, they don't have any dependency, they don't use any additional file, it's just one exe file, you launch it and it works. Generally, those kind of executables are related to either small or simple programs. So if you compile a Hello World program in C, for example, you're going to get a very small .exe file that's going to require nothing else than being launched. And that's the kind of programs that you would expect to operate that way. The second type of programs is executables that have dependencies, and to be more precise, they depend on other libraries or resources. Those are the most common type of executable, and basically when you have a program like that and you have an .exe file in a specific folder surrounded by some DLL files, some subdirectories, some JSON, some config or whatever. If you move the executable away from that folder and you try running it, it's going to give you an error. Or sometimes it's going to launch itself but work improperly. The kind of files it can use could be external libraries that are necessary to run the program. On Windows, those are commonly seen as DLL files. You have SDL DLL files for video games, DirectX files, so the D3, D9 DLLs you can see, OpenGL, Steam API, that kind of stuff. Basically code from libraries that our program uses but isn't actually part of the main program. And the other kind is just general resources, so a picture or an audio file or a configuration file that the program is going to use, and it's going to look for it in a specific folder, and if it doesn't exist in that folder, which is usually where the actual executable is located, it's just going to crash. So with that out of the way, we now know which files need to be modified in order to make a program work. Now we can explain how we can actually patch the things out. And that's theoretically pretty easy to understand. For standalone executables, the patching process consists in simply modifying the executable's code to change the behavior and make it work the way we need to. So it can be something like replacing some functions to make them compatible with the newest, or on the contrary, the oldest operating systems, or just adding a custom feature that didn't exist before, that kind of stuff. When you have the source code of a program, that process is very simple, because all you need to do is rewrite and recompile the source code, and you'll get a resulting executable file at the end of it, and you just replace that new executable where the old one was. In the case your program doesn't have the source code, then you need to reverse engineer the compiled code, and you need to modify the assembly instructions to adapt the program's behavior to the one you need. That's most commonly what you see in case of patching broken or old games, or to add a private server support to a game whose server's closed. In the case you have an executable that depends on other files or libraries, the process is similar, but instead of the executable itself, you could also modify one of the files it depends on. So if it's a configuration file, you can make your custom one and hope that it's going to work. That's often used for games which can be configured to connect to a private server, where you would just change the address, either IP address or HTTP address that the game is going to look for. And for the other kind of executable, it can also be modifying the library files it's going to load. So for old games, for example, you often are going to get some sort of DLL file that you're going to put in the games folder that's going to be compatible with Windows 10 and Windows 11 and whatnot. And once you put that in the games folder, your game is going to be compatible with modern operating systems. Now that I explained both how executables work and what kind of file they need, and how a patch for the programs is made, we can actually get to the actual patching process. And that process shouldn't be very complicated either. Nowadays, people who make patches try to make it as user-friendly as possible, so they usually give you a script or an executable you can just run that's going to locate where the program that you want to patch is and do all of the magic by itself. But let's assume that it's not the case and that the patch is either amateurish or made from long ago and doesn't have anything like that, and you need to do all of the dirty work by yourself. If that's the case, then what you want to do is that often you will be given either an executable file or some other files that you are supposed to put in the original programs folder. Usually you're going to override the already existing files, and that's all you need to do. So if you get a zip archive and inside of that archive you have a patch.exe file, if you try launching that patch file on its own, it's not going to do anything. But if you extract that file in the folder where your original software is located, then normally your magic is going to work. And really it's as simple as that. If you have a folder that you need to replace, you also do it, because usually it will have some dependencies inside that are going to be replaced. If you just have the executable, well, you replace the executable and that's the end of the story. This was a pretty spontaneous video, but I wanted to give a pretty small and concise explanations about that process, since I know that in case of old games and old programs in general, you often have patch files that might or might not have instructions, and in the case they don't have instructions, you can follow this general process of going into the original programs folder, putting your patched files in there, and hoping that it works, and usually that's going to be enough to get the patch working.